Chapter 80, Control of ECF Osmolarity and Sodium Concentration. So, regulation of ECF osmolarity and sodium concentration are closely linked because sodium is the most abundant ion in the extracellular compartment. Plasma sodium concentration is normally regulated within close limits of 140 to 145 milliequivalents per liter, with an average concentration of about 142 milliequivalents per liter. Osmolarity averages around 300 milliosmoles per liter, about 282 milliosmoles per liter when corrected for interionic attraction, and seldom changes more than 2 to 3%, plus 2 minus 3%, plus 2 to 3%, plus or minus. As discussed in the previous chapters, these variables must be precisely controlled because they determine the distribution of fluid between the intracellular and extracellular compartments. Normally, sodium ions and associated anions, primarily HCO3 minus and Cl minus, represent about 94% of the extracellular osmoles, with glucose and urea contributing about 3 to 5% of the total osmoles. However, because urea easily permeates most cell membranes, it exerts little effective osmotic pressure under steady state conditions. Therefore, sodium ions in the ECF and associated anions are the principal determinants of fluid movement across the cell membrane. Consequently, we can discuss the control of osmolarity and control of sodium ion concentration at the same time. Although multiple mechanisms control the amount of sodium and water excretion by the kidneys, two primary systems are especially involved in regulating the concentration of sodium and osmolarity of extracellular fluid: the osmoreceptor ADH system and the thirst mechanism. Coming to the osmoreceptor ADH feedback system, see this figure, it shows the basic components. Alright, so when osmolarity, that is plasma sodium concentration, increases above the normal because of water deficit, this feedback system operates as follows. An increase in the extracellular fluid osmolarity, which in practical terms means an increase in plasma sodium concentration, causes the special nerve cells called the osmoreceptor cells located in the anterior hypothalamus near the supraoptic nuclei to shrink. Okay, shrinkage of the osmoreceptor cells causes them to fire, sending nerve signals to additional nerve cells in the supraoptic nuclei, which then relay these signals down the stalk of the pituitary gland to the posterior pituitary. These action potentials conducted to the posterior pituitary stimulate the release of ADH, which is stored in secretory granules or vesicles in the nerve endings. ADH enters the bloodstream and is transported to the kidneys, where it increases the water permeability of the late distal tubules, cortical collecting tubules, and medullary collecting ducts. The increased water permeability in the distal nephron segments causes increased water reabsorption and excretion of a small amount of concentrated urine. Okay, thus water is conserved in the body while sodium and other solutes continue to be excreted in the urine. This causes dilution of the solutes in the ECF, thereby correcting the initial excessively concentrated ECF. The opposite sequence of events occurs when the extracellular fluid becomes too dilute. So, for example, with excess water ingestion and a decrease in ECF osmolarity, less ADH is formed, the renal tubules decrease their permeability for water, less water is reabsorbed, and a large volume of dilute urine is formed. This in turn concentrates the body fluids and returns plasma osmolarity toward normal. Coming to ADH synthesis in supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus and release from posterior pituitary, the hypothalamus contains two types of magnocellular neurons that synthesize ADH in the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus, about 5/6 in the supraoptic nuclei and about 1/6 in the paraventricular nuclei. Both of these nuclei have axonal extensions to the posterior pituitary. Once ADH is synthesized, it is transported down the axons of the neurons to their tips, terminating in the posterior pituitary gland. When the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei are stimulated by increased osmolarity or other factors, nerve impulses pass down these nerve endings, changing their membrane permeability and increasing calcium entry. ADH stored in the secretory vesicles or secretory granules of the nerve endings is then released in response to the increased calcium entry. The released ADH is then carried away in the capillary blood of the posterior pituitary into the systemic circulation, as you can see in this picture here. Okay. Now, secretion of ADH in response to an osmotic stimulus is rapid. So, plasma ADH levels can increase several fold within minutes, thereby providing a rapid means for altering renal excretion of water. A second neuronal area important in controlling osmolarity and ADH secretion is located along the anteroventral region of the third ventricle called the AV3V region. At the upper part of this region, there is a structure called the subfornical organ, and at the inferior part is another structure called the organum vasculosum of the lamina terminalis. Between these two organs is the median preoptic nucleus, which has multiple nerve connections with the two organs as well as with the supraoptic nuclei and the blood pressure control centers in the middle of the brain. Lesions of the AV3V region cause multiple deficits in the control of ADH secretion, thirst, sodium appetite, and blood pressure. Electrical stimulation of AV3V region or stimulation by angiotensin II can increase ADH secretion, thirst, and sodium appetite. In the vicinity of the AV3V region and the supraoptic nuclei and are neuronal cells that are excited by small increases in extracellular fluid osmolarity. Hence, the term osmoreceptors has been used to describe these neurons. These cells send nerve signals to the supraoptic nuclei to control their firing and secretion of ADH. It is also likely that they induce thirst in response to increased ECF osmolarity. Both the subfornical organ above and the organum vasculosum of lamina terminalis below have vascular supplies that lack the typical blood-brain barrier that impedes the diffusion of most ions from the blood into the brain tissue. This characteristic makes it possible for ions and other solutes to cross between the blood and the local interstitial fluid in this region. As a result, the osmoreceptors rapidly respond to changes in the osmolarity of the ECF, exerting powerful control over the secretion of ADH and over thirst as well. Coming to stimulation of ADH release by decreased arterial pressure or decreased blood volume. See, ADH release is also controlled by cardiovascular reflexes such as the arterial baroreceptor reflexes and also the cardiopulmonary reflexes. These reflex pathways originate in high pressure regions of the circulation such as the aortic arch and the carotid sinus, and in the low pressure regions such as the atria. Afferent stimuli are carried by the vagus and glossopharyngeal nerves with synapses in the nuclei of tractus solitarius. Projections from these nuclei relay signals to the hypothalamic nuclei that control ADH synthesis and secretion. Thus, in addition to increased osmolarity, two other stimuli increase ADH secretion: decreased arterial pressure and decreased blood volume. Whenever blood pressure and blood volume are reduced, such as during hemorrhage, increased ADH secretion causes increased fluid reabsorption by the kidneys, helping to restore blood pressure and blood volume towards the normal. Okay, so here you can see the effect of quantitative importance of osmolarity and cardiovascular reflexes in stimulating ADH secretion. As shown in this figure, either a decrease in effective blood volume or an increase in extracellular fluid osmolarity stimulates ADH secretion. So percentage change in the blood, see there is here on the y-axis you can see plasma ADH levels, and here you can see effect of decreased blood volume, the percentage changes. Okay, so ADH is considerably more sensitive to small changes in osmolarity than to similar percentage changes in blood volume. For example, a change in plasma osmolarity, as you can see here, which is isotonic volume depletion, isovolumic osmotic increase, as you can see. Quantitative importance of osmolarity and cardiovascular reflexes in stimulating ADH secretion. See, ADH is considerably more sensitive to small changes in osmolarity than to a similar percentage changes in blood volume. For example, a change in plasma osmolarity to only about 1% is enough to increase ADH levels, whereas after blood loss, plasma ADH levels do not change appreciably until there is a 10% reduction in the blood volume. With further decreases in blood volume, however, ADH levels they rapidly increase. Thus, with severe decreases in blood volume, cardiovascular reflexes play a major role in stimulating ADH secretion. Now, coming to other stimuli for ADH secretion can also be increased or decreased by other stimuli to the CNS as well as by various drugs and hormones. For example, nausea is a potent stimulus for ADH release, which may increase to as much as 100 times the normal after vomiting. Also, drugs such as nicotine and morphine, they stimulate ADH release, whereas some drugs such as alcohol, they inhibit ADH release. The marked diuresis that occurs after ingestion of alcohol is due in part to inhibition of ADH release. Okay, so you can see this. Drugs such as alcohol and clonidine and haloperidol, they decrease ADH secretion, and morphine and nicotine, they increase ADH secretion. Nausea is a potent stimulus that increases ADH secretion along with hypoxia. Okay, Now, coming to the importance of thirst in controlling ECF osmolarity and sodium concentration, the kidneys minimize fluid loss during water deficits through the osmoreceptor ADH feedback system. Adequate fluid intake, however, is necessary to counterbalance whatever fluid loss does occur through sweating and breathing and through the GIT. The fluid intake is regulated by the thirst mechanism, which, together with the osmoreceptor ADH mechanism, maintains precise control of extracellular fluid osmolarity and sodium concentration. Many of the same factors that stimulate ADH secretion also increase thirst, which is defined as the conscious desire for water. The same area along the antroventral wall of the third ventricle, AV3V region, that promotes ADH release also stimulates thirst. Located anterolaterally in the preoptic nucleus is another small area that, when stimulated electrically, causes immediate drinking that continues as long as the stimulation lasts. All these areas together are called the thirst center. The neurons of the thirst center respond to injections of hypertonic salt solutions by stimulating drinking behavior. These cells almost certainly function as osmoreceptors to activate the thirst mechanism in the same way that the osmoreceptors stimulate ADH release. Increased osmolarity of the cerebrospinal fluid in the third ventricle has essentially the same effect to promote drinking. It is likely that the organum vasculosum of the lamina terminalis, which lies immediately beneath the ventricular surface at the inferior end of the AV3V region, is intimately involved in mediating this response. Coming to the stimuli for thirst, one of the most important stimuli is increased extracellular fluid osmolarity, which causes intracellular dehydration in the thirst centers, thereby stimulating the sensation of thirst. Decreases in ECF volume and arterial pressure also stimulate thirst by a pathway that is independent of the one stimulated by increased plasma osmolarity, probably related to neural input from cardiopulmonary and systemic arterial baroreceptors in the circulation. Okay, so an important stimulus for thirst is angiotensin 2. So studies in animals have shown that angiotensin 2 acts on the subfornical organ and on the organum vasculosum of the lamina terminalis. These regions are outside the blood-brain barrier, and peptides such as angiotensin 2 diffuse into the tissues. Because angiotensin 2 is also stimulated by factors associated with hypovolemia and low blood pressure, its effect on thirst helps to restore blood volume and blood pressure towards the normal, along with other actions of angiotensin 2 on the kidneys to decrease fluid excretion. Dryness of the mouth and mucous membranes of the esophagus can elicit the sensation of thirst. As a result, a thirsty person may receive relief from thirst almost immediately after drinking water, even though the water has not been absorbed from the GI tract and has not yet had an effect on the ECF osmolarity. Gastrointestinal and pharyngeal stimuli influence thirst. In animals that have an esophageal opening to the exterior so that water is never absorbed into the blood, partial relief of thirst occurs after drinking, although the relief is only temporary. Also, the GI distension may partially alleviate thirst or reduce thirst. For instance, simple inflation of a balloon in the stomach can relieve thirst. However, relief of thirst sensations through gastrointestinal or pharyngeal mechanisms is short-lived. The desire to drink is completely satisfied only when the plasma osmolarity or the blood volume returns to normal. The ability of animals and humans to meter fluid intake is important because it prevents overhydration. After a person drinks water, 30 to 60 minutes may be required for the water to be reabsorbed and distributed throughout the body, half an hour or 1 hour. If the thirst sensation were not temporarily relieved after drinking water, the person would continue to drink more and more, eventually leading to overhydration and excess dilution of the body fluids. Experimental studies have repeatedly shown that animals drink almost exactly the amount necessary to return plasma osmolarity and volume back to normal. Coming to integrated responses of osmoreceptor, ADH, and thirst mechanisms in controlling the ECF osmolarity and sodium concentration. See, in a healthy person, the osmoreceptor, ADH, and thirst mechanism work in parallel despite the constant challenges of dehydration. Even with additional challenges such as high salt intake, these feedback systems are able to keep plasma osmolarity reasonably constant. An increase in sodium intake to as high as 6 times the normal only has a small effect on the plasma sodium concentration. See, an increase which is 6 times the normal only has a small increase in the plasma sodium concentration. Okay, as long as the ADH and thirst mechanisms are both functioning normally. If they are not functioning normally, there will be a rapid increase. Okay, so When either the ADH or thirst mechanism fails, the other ordinaries can still control ECF osmolarity and sodium concentration with reasonable effectiveness, as long as there is enough fluid intake to balance the daily obligatory urine volume and water losses caused by respiration, sweating, or gastrointestinal losses. However, if both the ADH and thirst mechanisms fail simultaneously, plasma sodium concentration and osmolarity are poorly controlled. Thus, when sodium intake is increased after blocking the total ADH thirst system, relatively large changes in plasma sodium concentration occur. In the absence of ADH thirst mechanisms, no other feedback mechanism is capable of adequately regulating plasma sodium concentration and osmolarity. Coming to the role of angiotensin 2 and aldosterone in controlling ECF osmolarity and sodium concentration. When sodium intake is low, increased levels of these hormones stimulate sodium reabsorption by the kidneys and therefore prevent large sodium losses, even though sodium intake may be reduced to as low as 10% of normal. Conversely, with high sodium intake, decreased formation of these hormones permits the kidneys to excrete large amounts of sodium. Because of the importance of angiotensin 2 and aldosterone in regulating sodium excretion by the kidneys, one might mistakenly infer that they also play an important role in regulating ECF sodium concentration. Although these hormones increase the amount of sodium in the extracellular fluid, they also increase the intracellular fluid volume by increasing reabsorption of water along with the sodium. ECF volume. Therefore, angiotensin 2 and aldosterone have little effect on sodium concentration except under extreme conditions. This relative unimportance of aldosterone in regulating extracellular fluid sodium concentration is shown by this experiment here. This figure shows the effect on plasma sodium concentration of changing sodium intake more than 6-fold in two conditions: under normal conditions and after the aldosterone feedback system was blocked by removing the adrenal glands and infusing the animals with aldosterone at a constant rate so that plasma levels could not increase or decrease. Note that when sodium intake was increased 6-fold, plasma concentration changed to only about 1 to 2% in either case. This finding indicates that even without a functional aldosterone feedback system, plasma sodium concentration can be well regulated. The same type of experiment has been conducted after blocking angiotensin 2 formation with the same result. There are two primary reasons why changes in angiotensin 2 and aldosterone do not have a major effect on plasma sodium concentration. First, as discussed earlier, angiotensin 2 and aldosterone increase both sodium and water reabsorption by the renal tubules, leading to increases in extracellular fluid volume and sodium quantity but little change in sodium concentration. Second, as long as the ADH thirst mechanism is functional, any tendency toward increased plasma sodium concentration is compensated for by increased water intake or increased plasma ADH secretion, which tends to dilute the ECF fluid back towards the normal. The ADH thirst system far overshadows both the angiotensin 2 and aldosterone systems for regulating sodium concentration under normal conditions. Even in patients with primary aldosteronism, who have extremely high levels of aldosterone, the plasma sodium concentration usually increases for only about 3 to 5 milliequivalents per liter above the normal. Under extreme conditions, caused by complete loss of aldosterone secretion as a result of adrenalectomy, or in patients with Addison's disease, which is severely impaired secretion or total lack of aldosterone, there is tremendous loss of sodium by the kidneys, which can lead to reductions in plasma sodium concentration. One of the reasons for this is that large losses of sodium eventually cause severe volume depletion and decreased blood pressure, which can activate the thirst mechanism through the cardiovascular reflexes. This activation leads to a further dilution of the plasma sodium concentration, even though the increased water intake helps to minimize the decrease in body fluid volumes under these conditions. Thus, extreme conditions exist in which plasma sodium concentration may change significantly, even without a functional ADH thirst mechanism. Even so, the ADH thirst mechanism is by far the most powerful feedback system in the body for controlling extracellular fluid osmolarity and sodium concentration. Coming to salt appetite mechanism, maintenance of normal ECF volume and sodium concentration requires a balance between sodium excretion and sodium intake. In modern civilizations, sodium intake is almost always greater than necessary for homeostasis. In fact, the average sodium intake for persons in industrialized cultures who eat processed foods usually ranges between 100 to 200 milliequivalents per day, even though humans can survive and function normally while ingesting only 10 to 20 milliequivalents per day. Thus, most people eat far more sodium than is necessary for homeostasis, and evidence indicates that our usual high sodium intake may contribute to cardiovascular disorders such as hypertension. Salt appetite is due in part to the fact that animals and humans like salt and eat it regardless of whether they are salt deficient. Salt appetite also has a regulatory component in which there is a behavioral drive to obtain salt when a sodium deficiency exists in the body. This behavioral drive is particularly important in herbivores, which naturally eat a low sodium diet, but salt craving may also be important in humans who have an extreme deficiency of sodium, such as occurs in Addison's disease. In this disease, there is a deficiency of aldosterone secretion, which causes excessive loss of sodium in the urine and leads to decreased extracellular fluid volume and decreased sodium concentration. Both of these changes elicit the desire for salt. In general, the primary stimuli that increase salt appetite are those associated with sodium deficits and decreased blood volume or decreased blood pressure associated with circulatory insufficiency. The neuronal mechanism for salt appetite is analogous to that of the thirst mechanism. Some of the same neuronal centers in the AV3V region of the brain seem to be involved because lesions in this region frequently affect both thirst and salt appetite simultaneously in humans. Also, circulatory reflexes elicited by low blood pressure or decreased blood volume affect both thirst and salt appetite at the same time.